So we are planning and engineering. Let me see if I can figure out how to, there we go. So we are a group of just over 60 folks and do a variety of things for the department. Here are some of the leadership team that I rely very heavily on. As I mentioned, I definitely don't do, well, really anything by myself. So our planning services manager, who's relatively new to the role, but has been with the city for some time in a couple of other positions, is Swerveen Narenda, and he, I'll talk a little bit more about what planning services does, but we're super fortunate to have him. He has experience in the private sector before joining Aurora, has a lot of great technical expertise in engineering, especially tunneling and boring, not boring, different kind of boring projects, and has most recently taken on this role and has a really good perspective on modeling and long-range planning. Our engineering services manager, Vern Adam, has been with the city over 30 years in a variety of different roles, so he has a lot of really great historical knowledge, as well as a great ability to work with our development community. And he has a very important role right now with how quickly everything is growing. Our project delivery services manager, Steve Fiore, also been with the city for some time. He actually joined the city during the Prairie Waters project construction. He's been leading the project delivery team for some time, as well as overseeing the inspectors. And then we're very fortunate to have principal level and senior level engineers in different parts of the utility, or different segments of the utility. Dean Bedford is our technical expert in T&D and pumping. Elizabeth Carter in treatment. Both of them did have private sector experience before joining the city. Similarly, Tony Tran, he's our expert in stormwater. Andrea Long in wastewater. The both of them are kind of new additions into this leadership and principal team. And we were very fortunate to have John Clark join us for our water resources principal. He's got quite a history in large reservoir and dam construction and rehab projects, which was an expertise we obviously need, looking at Alex's future storage projects that they're coming to the table with. So a lot of those principals and seniors are responsible not only for technical expertise in the utility, but also for implementation of our very complex capital projects and overseeing the capital projects in their specific disciplines. These are the things that are in planning services. So in Swerveen's team, they're responsible for doing all the long-range master planning, as well as system modeling for water, wastewater, raw water. And they're also responsible for asset management, as well as GIS and CMMS, and I'll go through each of those briefly. So master planning. So we have a lot of different master plans that we do to plan for the different disciplines. The integrated water master plan is called integrated because that's what it is. It includes the source and supply, so the information and kind of coordination with Alex's team, as well as treatment, distribution, and then into non-potable, where, as Alex had mentioned, we recapture some of that water or reuse some of that water in non-potable ways throughout the system. And so all of that is combined and looked at with what the demand is as the city continues to grow. The last one was completed in 2016, and we're just about to kick off the new refresh of that plan here this year. We try to make sure that our master plans are updated every 5 years because a lot changes in 5 years with growth and climate and acquisitions and infrastructure. And so it's a constantly changing picture that we just need to make sure that we're refreshing so that we're still headed in the right direction. Another plan that we did, I think that was also in 2017, is our wastewater master plan. So that's looking at how to collect the wastewater from throughout the city and then convey it to our district partner, Metro Wastewater, who does the majority of our treatment. Outside, as Marshall mentioned outside of our Sand Creek reclaimed water facility, where we do treat around 5 MGD and use for reclaimed water uses. But that master plan looks a lot at just the conveyance of wastewater, including lift stations and gravity pipelines primarily. We also are, as Marshall had mentioned, provide stormwater service. And so we have a master plan in stormwater. It's a little bit different. We work with Mile High Flood District to do individual master plans in each of the major drainage basins throughout the city. But in 2016, what we did is consolidated all the projects from those master plans into a prioritized list of about 240, I think at the time, projects to implement throughout the, I think it's probably a 50-year horizon to implement those. But we also revisit those maybe more on a 10 or 15-year basis, because not a lot changes once the development has occurred in that basin. The basins that are developing quickly and kind of new, then we'll look at those a little more often, but impervious area or area in the system where rainfall runs off and then creates stormwater that we have to manage stays pretty consistent for the most part in basins that have already been developed. Other master plans that we implement and are going to continue working on: energy master plan, looking at our energy uses, efficiencies that we can gain, areas for renewable energy opportunities is something that we'll be doing again here soon. SCADA master plan, how our system communicates to bring information back from facilities or to convey information to facilities to operate those facilities remotely and monitor them from usage and security reasons is a SCADA master plan, as well as a meter master plan, which we did a number of years ago to kind of head down the direction of AMI from ASR, which was a previous meter system where you had to drive by to collect the data, and it was kind of once a month reads, switching to AMI, which is now real-time reads that can be remotely provided. So, so that's kind of planning. And again, it's just looking, the majority of them are looking at all of the undeveloped parts of the city, which is half, right? The city is about 150 square miles, and we have about 70 square miles that all feel like they're developing right now. But it's basically identifying the infrastructure required to support that growth, and the timing of that and the sizing of that. And then if there are developments that come in ahead of when we can build regional infrastructure, then they would be required to build it to the size of the master plan, so we don't have duplicate infrastructure among the developments. It's regional infrastructure and then localized infrastructure on a smaller scale. So then asset management is also in Sravine's team. We've been focusing a lot on data associated with monitoring assets and their life cycle and costs associated with keeping the system up to the current level of service, or in some cases, increasing the level of service. As you can see in this graph right here, we had a lot of infrastructure. This is actually our sewer system, kind of a snapshot of when infrastructure was installed. There was a lot of infrastructure in the 70s, vitrified clay pipe. And as you can see, we kind of transitioned to PVC, but saw less development or installation of sewer lines in the 80s and 90s, and then a big tick up in the 2000s, the 10s. We're looking at the CIPP is actually slip lining, which is basically putting rehabbing a pipe by putting a pipe inside the old pipe. And I'm sure this graph for the last decade is going to be closer to this. We've seen quite a lot of growth. So we've been working on strategic plans and long-range plans to identify how much we need to invest in the system, where we need to invest in the system, and how to analyze data to make sure that we're doing it appropriately. Also in his team, GIS and CMMS. So the department relies really heavily on geographic information systems. It's basically how we track all of our assets in the city, and it's digital. And so that team is responsible for taking all the new infrastructure or updates to existing infrastructure and making sure that it's kept in the digital maps appropriately. We do get a lot of help from the operations team for corrections that they find in the data, because as you can imagine, at one point, actually, these were, and not too long ago, these were all paper map books, which you had to literally shift the lines out of where they were actually located in order to see everything on a paper map book. So we've been also spending quite a bit of time correcting things so that they're appropriately geolocated so that operations staff can find them or developers can find them to connect into them for redevelopment areas and such. But we moved to mobile applications. So now instead of those paper map books, everybody has a tablet so they can see those things on the screen. They can click on a water line or a sewer line and find out more information about it, as well as moved, I think that's actually on the next slide, but this team is also responsible for creating maps, doing data analysis, and then helping create applications to help operations and other staff do their job more efficiently. The computer maintenance management system, or CMMS system, is basically work order tracking for our operations staff, time tracking, keeps track of costs for repairs or maintenance activities. And then we have the ability to look at that data and then the asset history around that. But primarily it's a work order and service request tracking, management, and assignment tool. That also recently went mobile in the last couple of years. So people have the ability to access those work orders digitally from the field versus being on paper. And this is what a screenshot of what that looks like if this was your day and you had all these work orders to do from this team. Let's see. And then modeling is also in his team, where it's basically a digital replica of the systems to evaluate how it functions under different scenarios, under growth scenarios. This picture here is our sewer system to understand as the city continues to grow down to the southeast, which of those sewer lines are going to be over capacity and need to be replaced. And then also primarily or mainly working with Alex's team as the water resources modeler that is within Swerve's group, but primarily serving the function to help water resources with their very complex model, which I don't have a picture of, but it's pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive. It's pretty complicated. Our engineering services, as I mentioned, Vern Adam. So his group does the plans review process. They collect the fees, and then they also work on developer agreements. The plans review process, it's basically when a new development comes into the city and they want to put together a set of utility plans for us to provide service. That team reviews those plans to make sure that everything is built per our specifications, per our requirements, and to make sure that the infrastructure that operations will take over is an asset that they can continue to manage. So they're very, very busy. This is a chart of kind of civil plan reviews and how they've gone over time. As you can see, there's a lot of growth in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then a really big spike in growth recently in 2019, which we're seeing a little dip in that in 2020, but in 2021 we're kind of seeing an uptick again. So we're back into the most plan reviews we've ever had in 2019. So lots of growth. The TAPS office is what another team is called in his group, and they are responsible for helping calculate those connection fees that Joanne was mentioning. And then asking for the developers to pay those when they come in for development, and different fees at different times. But he does have a few people on his team that help collect those fees based on what their development looks like and what their water demands are projected to be. They also work a lot with a bunch of different agreements with the development community. So when they come in for annexation, the requirements that are in our annexation agreement, like for instance, they're required to dedicate easements to us for infrastructure or regional infrastructure. They're required to dedicate their groundwater rights to us, things like that. Developer agreements that help outline what infrastructure is required for them to develop and timing and requirements associated with that. We wrap in master plan requirements into that agreement. And then a number of other agreements. Reimbursement agreements is a situation where a developer will build a regional infrastructure, so bigger than what they would need for their development. But as we were showing on that master plan, it goes across their development to provide service to others. We'll actually reimburse them for the oversizing of that infrastructure cost from beyond what they need, and then they'll get paid back as other people tie on to that infrastructure in the system. And then our third group is the Project Delivery Services group, which also includes our principal engineers. As I mentioned, Steve Fiore is the manager of that. So he works a lot with consistent project controls for the variety of project managers and assisting the principal engineers for consistency in the group and educating the group on new requirements and such. And he also oversees our inspection services team. So project management, that group does all the engineering and design, procurement, and then contractor procurement and construction for all the projects, or the majority of the projects. Alex's team does a few, but the majority of the projects that come in as required from master plans or asset management or operations needs. And they do have a pre-qualified list of, I think they just finished that. It's about 55 different consultants that are pre-qualified and have been identified as experts in different categories. And so, and they also do a lot of scheduling and estimating for those, utility coordination, permitting support. So they cover the whole gamut, source to supply, working on things like Alex had mentioned in terms of wild horse, all the treatment projects, distribution. We'll get into kind of a list of those here in a bit. But the other thing that is definitely important as a part of Steve Fiore's team is the inspection services. So it's a group of folks on the team who are making sure that the plans that were reviewed by the engineering staff are now getting implemented in the field as they were designed. So they inspect the development projects. They also inspect the capital projects that our project delivery service teams procure for those in design and then ultimately construct. They're also doing inspections for those projects as well. Service lines, as new or rehabilitated service lines come in, if like you had to fix your sewer line to the street as an example, they do provide inspections on those things to make sure that they were installed properly. And yeah, that's basically their job. They're also very busy right now. So our capital projects group, they manage between 70 and 90 projects between studies, design, and construction at any given time. As Joanne mentioned, some of the money will carry forward for projects that were only partially complete in the previous year. So our working budget this year is about $400 million. It's typically closer to 150 to about 275, but this is a list of a number of the large dollar projects that are happening in 2021. They include a number of large interceptors coming through the city, again, to support all that growth that's happening in the Northeast. And some of those interceptors are actually taking what used to be lifted sewage, so from lift stations that are very energy intensive, and actually turning those into gravity systems that will connect with a new northern gravity system for Metro that goes up to their northern treatment plant by Brighton, which is also close to the Prairie water system that Alex had mentioned. There's the SEAM facility is something that Joanne had mentioned. We're very excited. That's getting kicked off right this month. So we're starting to break ground on that, which is fantastic. We have improvements on the Sand Creek facility that was built back in the 60s. So some rehabilitation going on there. The next few projects are stormwater projects where we're decreasing flooding potential for houses and businesses in those areas. Water line replacement, just replacing some of those pipes that were built in the 50s and 60s in the older part of Aurora. We've got another couple stormwater projects. I think I mentioned AMI. North Campus, that's where Alex had talked about prairie water system. There's the wells in that area. We're building some new ones and rehabilitating some existing ones, procuring some additional land for that. We have a lot of focus on our rampart pipeline. I'll talk about that a little bit more. This is kind of design, land acquisition, and permitting money for Wild Horse that was also mentioned by Alex. And then treatment, I kind of ran out of room. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of big projects this year, but there's a lot of treatment projects as well to bring plants up to a rated capacity or to rehab some portions of the facility. Here's a quick picture of SEAM, just a couple of pictures of the example projects that I just gave. So again, this is our new maintenance facility and does include some administration, but it's got a couple of bays for the different, I think Marshall had mentioned the 300 and something staff who help keep this operating, keep our whole system operating every day. A couple of maintenance bays for them and offices for that group. And that kind of extends back here. There's a meter shop, and the water quality lab that Marshall had mentioned is also back here. We've got a trades and a warehouse for storage of all of our parts and equipment, and then an administration building where the majority of us who are in the AMC will actually be moving in 2023 when this is completed. The part of this project also, as Joanne mentioned, is the CNAC Creek interceptor. So so here's where the SEAM facility is right here in pink. And this project, we're actually also able to get rid of another lift station that has been here historically, and we're able to take this whole basin, which is everything south of Aurora Reservoir, by gravity north past the SEAM facility. We'll collect the sewer flows from here. And then this interceptor is actually a future regional interceptor that will collect sewage flows from the future developments here and then goes up towards Murphy Creek. So it's a very good long-term investment for handling or creating efficiencies along this whole basin. So that's very exciting. Alex had shown the prairie water system. This is a map in a little bit more detail on how we need to expand that system. In our master plan, it showed a couple of years, I think by 2030, we were looking at an expansion of additional 10 MGD and another 10 MGD by 2040. I might be getting those dates a little mixed up, but we've been working very hard on land acquisitions and new wells in order to increase the capacity to bring those return flows back to the Benny purification facility, which is actually right across the street from the SEAM facility that I just showed you. And so they're so busy buying water rights, we need to bring them back to the city, and that's kind of what we do is put the infrastructure with the plan. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention, I had shown that we have some investments in the rampart system, which is something we're definitely focusing on. This is our main raw water supply to bring all of those mountain supplies Alex had talked about back into the city. It's dual pipelines, one of which is a pretty interesting material that runs under some of the developed parts of the tech center and such. And so we're constantly monitoring those to make sure that it stays intact and that we're doing rehabilitation on some of the older parts of the system, but also we need to expand this system. And so we're looking at areas where we're going to be paralleling and then dig and replacing some portions of this to increase the capacity for the additional water to bring it into the city from our mountain supplies. And I think that was it.